The morning fog rolled across the training grounds at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, creating an eerie silence that seemed to swallow every sound except the distant crash of Pacific waves. Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the sniper rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon that had become an extension of herself over the past 8 years. She had arrived at the base before dawn, as she always did, knowing that today would be different from any other day in her military career. Sarah wasn't supposed to be here. As a Marine Corps sniper instructor, she had earned respect through countless successful missions and training programs. But the Navy SEALs had always been an exclusive brotherhood. Women had only recently been allowed into combat roles, and the idea of a female sniper joining the most elite special operations unit in the military was still met with skepticism, doubt, and sometimes outright hostility. The invitation to this evaluation had come through unofficial channels. Commander Jake Viper Morrison, a legend in the SEAL community with over 15 years of special operations experience, had heard whispers about the Marine sniper who consistently outperformed her male counterparts. His curiosity had been piqued when Sarah's commanding officer mentioned her record-breaking shots during a joint training exercise 6 months earlier. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Montana, where hunting was a way of life, and marksmanship was passed down through generations like family recipes. Her grandfather, a World War II veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was 10 years old, using an old bolt-action rifle that required perfect form and patience. Unlike the video games and action movies that portrayed sniping as glamorous, her grandfather had taught her the discipline, mathematics, and mental fortitude required to place a single bullet exactly where it needed to go. The path to this moment had been filled with obstacles that would have broken most people. During her early military training, male instructors had deliberately given her inferior equipment, hoping she would fail and wash out of the program. Fellow trainees had questioned whether she had the emotional stability to take a human life when necessary. Some had even spread rumors that her impressive scores were the result of special treatment rather than genuine skill. Each challenge had only strengthened her resolve. Sarah had learned to calculate wind speed and direction by observing the movement of grass and leaves from distances that amazed her instructors. She could determine the exact trajectory needed to compensate for bullet drop at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Most importantly, she had developed the mental control to slow her heart rate and breathing, creating windows of perfect stillness that allowed for shots that seemed impossible to others. The evaluation process had already lasted 3 grueling days. Sarah had been tested on everything from basic marksmanship to complex tactical scenarios that required split-second decision-making. She had crawled through mud, sand, and thorny undergrowth while maintaining her weapon in perfect condition. She had demonstrated her ability to remain motionless for hours at a time, waiting for the perfect moment to take a shot. She had proven that she could work effectively as part of a team while maintaining the independence and self-reliance that made snipers so valuable in special operations. The other candidates were all men, each with impressive military backgrounds and specialized training. There was Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and possessed an uncanny ability to read terrain. Thompson, a Navy corpsman turned sniper, brought medical expertise that made him invaluable for long-duration missions. Williams, a force reconnaissance Marine, had demonstrated exceptional skills in urban warfare environments. Despite her proven abilities, Sarah could feel the weight of skepticism from some of the evaluators. She overheard conversations in the mess hall where instructors debated whether physical strength limitations would prevent her from carrying the heavy equipment required for extended missions. Others questioned whether she could maintain emotional control in high-stress combat situations, apparently forgetting that she had already served in combat zones and earned decorations for her performance under fire. Commander Morrison himself seemed to be withholding judgment, watching her performance with the analytical eye of someone who had seen countless candidates come and go. He rarely spoke directly to any of the candidates, preferring to observe their actions and decision-making processes during practical exercises. When he did speak, his words carried the weight of authority earned through years of leading dangerous missions in hostile environments. The morning of the final evaluation arrived with unusual weather conditions. The fog was thicker than normal, and meteorologists reported unpredictable wind patterns caused by a storm system moving in from the ocean. These conditions would make accurate long-distance shooting extremely challenging, requiring snipers to rely more heavily on instinct and experience rather than standard calculations and reference points. Sarah had spent the previous evening in quiet preparation, cleaning her rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and reassembled with the care of someone who understood that mechanical failure was not an option when lives depended on accuracy. She had also reviewed topographical maps of the testing area, studying elevation changes and potential wind corridors that might affect bullet trajectory. The final test would involve multiple shooting positions at various distances, culminating in a shot that had never been successfully completed by any candidate in the program's history. The target was positioned 1,847 meters away, beyond the effective range listed in most military manuals for the rifle system they were using. Environmental conditions, including elevation changes and unpredictable wind patterns, made the shot mathematically challenging even under ideal circumstances. As Sarah made her way to the starting position, she noticed the other candidates making final preparations for their own attempts. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone understanding that this final evaluation would determine not just who qualified for the program, but also who would earn the respect of their peers and instructors. Failure here meant returning to their previous assignments with the knowledge that they had fallen short of the highest standards in military special operations. The first shooting position required candidates to engage targets at 800 meters while lying prone on uneven terrain. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle stock against her cheek. Through her scope, she could see the target clearly despite the morning haze. Her breathing slowed automatically, and her heart rate decreased as she entered the focused mental state that had served her throughout her career. The first shot was perfect, striking the target dead center. She moved efficiently to the second position, a standing shot at 600 meters that required excellent body control and breathing technique. Again, her bullet found its mark with precision that drew nods of approval from the observing instructors. The pattern continued through several more positions, each presenting unique challenges that tested different aspects of marksmanship skill. Other candidates were performing well, but Sarah noticed that some were beginning to show signs of pressure as the difficulty increased. Rodriguez had missed his fourth shot by inches, a small error that he was visibly frustrated about. Thompson was taking longer between shots, suggesting that he was struggling with the mental pressure of the evaluation. Williams had maintained consistent accuracy, but seemed to be expending considerable energy to do so. As they approached the final shooting position, Commander Morrison gathered all the candidates together. His weathered face showed no emotion as he surveyed the group, but Sarah could sense the anticipation building among everyone present. The morning fog was beginning to lift slightly, but visibility was still limited and wind conditions remained unpredictable. The final position was located on an elevated platform that provided a clear line of sight to the distant target. However, the shot would require firing across a valley where wind currents were notoriously difficult to predict. The target itself was smaller than those used in previous positions, and its location placed it at the absolute maximum effective range for their rifle systems. Commander Morrison's voice carried clearly across the platform as he explained the requirements for the final shot. Each candidate would have one opportunity to engage the target. There would be no practice rounds, no wind flags for reference, and no assistance from spotters. Success would depend entirely on individual skill, experience, and the ability to make accurate calculations under pressure. Sarah studied the target through her scope, noting every detail that might affect her shot. The distance was significant, requiring her to aim well above the actual target to compensate for bullet drop. Wind conditions appeared to be shifting constantly, creating challenges that would require her to make educated guesses about conditions at the target location based on observations from her shooting position. She had faced similar challenges before, but never under such intense scrutiny and never with so much at stake. This shot would determine not just her future in special operations, but also whether other women would have opportunities to prove themselves in similar roles. The weight of that responsibility was both motivating and intimidating. As Sarah prepared for her attempt, she could hear quiet conversations among the instructors and evaluators. Some were discussing the technical challenges of the shot, while others debated whether any of the candidates had the skill necessary to succeed. The general consensus seemed to be that the shot was beyond the capabilities of most military snipers, regardless of their training or experience. Commander Morrison approached each candidate individually, providing final instructions and ensuring that everyone understood the parameters of the test. When he reached Sarah, his expression was unreadable, but she detected what might have been a hint of curiosity in his eyes. He had observed her performance throughout the evaluation with professional interest, but had given no indication of his assessment of her abilities. The order of shooting had been determined by performance in earlier stages, placing Sarah third in line behind Rodriguez and Thompson. This position allowed her to observe their attempts and potentially learn from any mistakes, but it also meant dealing with increased pressure as the moment of her own attempt approached. Rodriguez stepped up to the firing line first, his confidence evident in the way he handled his rifle and settled into position. Sarah watched through binoculars as he spent nearly 3 minutes studying the target area, making calculations and adjustments to his scope. When he finally took the shot, the sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Through the spotting scope, observers could see that his bullet had struck low and left of the target, missing by approximately 2 feet. It was a respectable attempt given the extreme difficulty of the shot, but Rodriguez's disappointment was obvious as he stepped back from the firing line. Thompson's approach was more methodical. As a corpsman, he had developed patience through years of medical training that required precise movements under pressure. He spent even longer than Rodriguez studying environmental conditions, observing the movement of vegetation at various distances to gauge wind patterns. His shot was closer than Rodriguez's attempt, striking just inches from the target's edge, but still not achieving the direct hit required for success. Thompson accepted the result with professional composure, but Sarah could see the frustration in his body language. Williams chose a different strategy, relying on instinct and rapid execution rather than prolonged analysis. His military experience had taught him that overthinking could be just as dangerous as inadequate preparation. He settled into position quickly, made his calculations, and fired within 90 seconds of taking his position. The shot was impressive for its speed, but accuracy suffered as a result, with his bullet striking several feet wide of the target. As Sarah's turn approached, she could feel the attention of everyone present focusing on her. The 3 previous attempts had all failed, reinforcing the general belief that the shot was beyond the capabilities of any candidate. Some observers were already discussing the possibility that no one would succeed, which would make the final evaluation inconclusive. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the murmured conversations as he called Sarah to the firing line. She moved forward with deliberate calm, carrying her rifle with the same casual confidence she had displayed throughout the evaluation. Inside, however, she was fighting to control a combination of excitement and nervousness that threatened to disrupt her normal shooting routine. Sarah settled into her preferred prone position, feeling the solid platform beneath her body and ensuring that her rifle was supported properly. Through her scope, the distant target appeared impossibly small, barely visible even at maximum magnification. She began her pre-shot routine, checking her rifle's zero, verifying her scope settings, and making mental calculations based on distance, wind, humidity, and temperature. The mathematical complexity of the shot was staggering. At nearly 1,850 meters, her bullet would take almost 3 seconds to reach the target, during which time it would drop more than 20 feet from its initial trajectory. Wind conditions would push the bullet laterally, requiring her to aim significantly to one side to compensate. Temperature and humidity would affect both bullet velocity and air density, creating additional variables that had to be estimated rather than calculated precisely. Sarah's breathing slowed as she entered the focused mental state that had served her throughout her career. The sounds of conversation behind her faded into background noise, and her attention narrowed to include only the target, her rifle, and the environmental conditions that would affect her shot. This was the mental discipline her grandfather had taught her, refined through years of military training and combat experience. Through her scope, she studied the target area carefully, looking for any visual cues that might help her gauge wind conditions. A few sparse trees were visible in the middle distance, their movement providing hints about wind direction and velocity. She also observed dust and debris being blown across the valley floor, creating a mental map of wind patterns that would affect her bullet's flight path. The pressure of the moment was intense, but Sarah had learned to use pressure as a focusing tool rather than allowing it to create anxiety. Every sniper faced moments when a single shot could determine the success or failure of an entire mission, and this evaluation was simply another such moment. She had trained for situations exactly like this, and her muscle memory and mental preparation would guide her through the process. Behind her, she could hear quiet conversations among the observers. Some were discussing the technical impossibility of the shot, while others speculated about whether the evaluation standards were unreasonably high. Commander Morrison remained silent, watching her preparations with the analytical attention of someone who had observed countless snipers in action. Sarah made a series of scope adjustments, elevating her point of aim to compensate for bullet drop, and shifting left to account for the crosswind she had observed. Each adjustment was based on calculations that combined mathematical formulas with intuitive understanding gained through years of experience. The final settings represented her best estimate of the conditions that would exist along the bullet's entire flight path. She controlled her breathing carefully, taking several deep breaths to oxygenate her blood, and then settling into the shallow breathing pattern that would provide stability for her shot. Her heart rate slowed as she focused on the rhythm of her breathing, creating natural pauses where her body would be completely still. The crosshairs settled on a point approximately 6 feet above and 3 feet to the left of the actual target, compensating for the environmental factors that would affect her bullet's trajectory. Sarah held this aim point steady, waiting for the perfect moment when her breathing, heartbeat, and mental focus aligned to create the conditions necessary for an accurate shot. The moment arrived with a clarity that she had experienced many times before in combat situations. Time seemed to slow as she applied steady pressure to the trigger, maintaining her sight picture and following through with the shot exactly as she had been trained. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar force, and the sound of the shot echoed across the valley. For nearly 3 seconds, everyone present watched and waited as the bullet traveled its long arc toward the distant target. Sarah remained in position, maintaining her sight picture and observing the target area through her scope. The silence was complete except for the whisper of wind across the firing platform. The bullet struck the target with a metallic ring that was barely audible across the distance, but the impact was clearly visible through the spotting scopes. Sarah had achieved a direct hit, placing her shot within inches of the target's center despite the extreme range and challenging environmental conditions. The reaction from observers was immediate and dramatic. Instructors who had been skeptical about the possibility of success rushed to verify the hit through their spotting equipment. Other candidates stared in amazement, understanding the technical difficulty of what they had just witnessed. Even Commander Morrison, known for his stoic demeanor, showed a brief expression of surprise before returning to his professional composure. Sarah remained in position for several more seconds, confirming her hit through her rifle scope before finally rising from the firing line. She felt a surge of satisfaction and relief, but maintained the professional demeanor that had carried her through 8 years of military service. The shot had been successful, but she understood that this was just the beginning of what would be a much longer and more challenging journey. The verification process took several minutes as range safety officers traveled to the target location to confirm and photograph the hit. When they returned with documented proof of Sarah's success, the atmosphere among the observers shifted dramatically. What had been skepticism and doubt was replaced by respect and curiosity about how she had accomplished something that the others had failed to achieve. Rodriguez was the first to congratulate her, demonstrating the professional respect that existed among military snipers regardless of gender or service branch. Thompson and Williams followed, each acknowledging her achievement with the understanding that came from shared experience in attempting the same incredibly difficult shot. Commander Morrison approached Sarah individually, studying her with new interest. For the first time during the evaluation, he engaged her in direct conversation, asking detailed questions about her shooting technique, her calculations, and her mental preparation for the shot. His questions revealed deep technical knowledge and suggested that he was beginning to view her as a legitimate candidate for the program rather than simply an experiment in gender integration. The successful completion of the final shot represented more than just marksmanship skill. It demonstrated Sarah's ability to perform under extreme pressure while being observed and evaluated by some of the most experienced special operations professionals in the military. It proved that her training, experience, and mental discipline were sufficient to meet the highest standards expected of special operations personnel. However, Sarah understood that marksmanship was only one component of what would be required if she were selected for the SEAL program. Special operations missions required physical endurance, mental toughness, teamwork, and the ability to make life and death decisions under conditions of extreme stress and uncertainty. The shooting evaluation had been designed to test technical skills, but the real challenges would come if she were invited to participate in the full training program. As the evaluation concluded and equipment was secured, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Every obstacle she had overcome, every doubt she had faced, and every hour of practice had contributed to her ability to succeed when it mattered most. The shot had been perfect, but, more importantly, it had opened doors that had previously been closed to women in the military. The drive back to base was quiet, with each candidate processing their performance and considering what the results might mean for their future careers. Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about her chances, but she also understood that success in one evaluation did not guarantee acceptance into the program. The decision would ultimately be made by people who considered not just technical skills, but also psychological profiles, leadership potential, and the ability to work effectively within the close-knit teams that characterize special operations units. The weeks following the evaluation passed with agonizing slowness as Sarah returned to her regular duties as a Marine Corps sniper instructor. Every phone call and every piece of mail brought the possibility of news about her application, but the official silence stretched on without any indication of the decision that would determine her future career path. She maintained her normal routine, training new Marine snipers and conducting advanced marksmanship courses, but her mind frequently returned to that moment when her bullet had struck the distant target. During this waiting period, Sarah learned through unofficial channels that her shot had become something of a legend within the special operations community. Word had spread about the female Marine sniper who had accomplished what experienced SEAL candidates had failed to achieve, and opinions were divided about what her success meant for the future of women in combat roles. Some viewed her achievement as proof that gender should not be a barrier to participation in the most demanding military roles, pointing to her technical skill and mental discipline as evidence that women could meet the same standards as men. Others remained skeptical, arguing that one successful shot did not demonstrate the full range of capabilities required for special operations missions that could last for days or weeks under extreme physical and psychological stress. Commander Morrison had been conducting his own investigation into Sarah's background and performance record during this period. He had spoken with her previous commanding officers, reviewed her personnel files, and studied video recordings of her performance during various training exercises. What he discovered was a pattern of consistent excellence that went far beyond the single impressive shot that had first captured his attention. Sarah's combat record included multiple deployments where she had provided overwatch for infantry units conducting dangerous operations in hostile territory. She had been credited with eliminating threats that could have resulted in American casualties, and her fellow Marines consistently praised her professionalism and reliability under fire. Most importantly, she had demonstrated the psychological resilience necessary to make life and death decisions without hesitation when the situation demanded immediate action. The medical and psychological evaluations that were part of the SEAL selection process had also been overwhelmingly positive. Sarah's physical conditioning was excellent, with test scores that placed her in the top percentile among all military personnel regardless of gender. Her psychological profile indicated high levels of stress tolerance, emotional stability, and the ability to maintain focus during prolonged periods of uncertainty and danger. When the phone call finally came, Sarah was conducting a training exercise for new Marine recruits at Camp Pendleton. Commander Morrison's voice was characteristically direct and professional as he informed her that she had been selected for the SEAL training program, making her the first woman to achieve this distinction in the program's history. The news brought a surge of emotions that Sarah had to control carefully. Joy, relief, excitement, and apprehension all competed for attention as she processed the magnitude of what had just been offered to her. She had achieved a goal that many people believed was impossible, but she also understood that the real challenges were just beginning. The SEAL training program, officially known as Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training or BUD/S, was legendary for its difficulty and high attrition rate. Even highly qualified candidates regularly failed to complete the program, which was designed to push students beyond their perceived physical and mental limitations. Sarah would be entering this program as the only woman among dozens of men, many of whom might question her presence or her ability to meet the same standards. Commander Morrison explained during their conversation that her acceptance into the program did not represent any lowering of standards or special accommodations. She would be expected to meet exactly the same requirements as every other student, and failure would mean immediate dismissal from the program. The fact that she was making history as the first woman to attempt SEAL training would bring additional scrutiny and pressure that she would have to manage alongside the normal challenges of the program. The media attention that followed the announcement of her selection was intense and sometimes unwelcome. Reporters wanted to know everything about her background, her motivations, and her expectations for success in the program. Military officials had to balance public interest in this historic development with operational security requirements that limited what could be disclosed about special operations training methods. Sarah handled the media attention with the same professionalism she had displayed throughout her military career, providing brief interviews that focused on her commitment to serving her country and her gratitude for the opportunity to compete for a place in the SEAL community. She carefully avoided making predictions about her chances of success, emphasizing instead that she intended to work as hard as possible to meet whatever challenges the program would present. Behind the scenes, preparations for her participation in the program involved careful planning by military officials who understood the historic significance of her presence. Security measures were enhanced to protect her from potential threats, and additional medical and psychological support personnel were made available to ensure that she had access to whatever resources might be needed during the demanding training process. The other students in her BUD/S class represented a diverse group of military personnel from various service branches and backgrounds. Most were young men in their early 20s, though some were older and had previous special operations experience. All had undergone rigorous screening processes to qualify for the program, and each brought unique skills and motivations to the training environment. Sarah's first day of SEAL training began before dawn with physical fitness tests that would establish baseline measurements for each student's capabilities. She had prepared extensively for these evaluations, knowing that her performance would set the tone for how she was perceived by both instructors and fellow students. The tests included swimming, running, push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, all conducted under time constraints that eliminated candidates who could not meet minimum standards. Her performance in these initial tests was outstanding, with scores that placed her among the top performers in her class. This early success helped establish her credibility with fellow students and demonstrated that her selection had been based on merit rather than political considerations. The instructors, many of whom had been skeptical about including a woman in the program, began to view her as a legitimate candidate rather than simply an experiment. The famous Hell Week portion of SEAL training began several weeks into the program, representing the most challenging phase that would eliminate the majority of candidates. During this period, students would endure 5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep, constant physical challenges, and psychological pressure designed to test their determination to become SEALs. Sarah approached Hell Week with careful preparation and realistic expectations. She understood that physical strength differences might put her at a disadvantage during some portions of the training, but she was confident that her mental toughness and technical skills would allow her to overcome these challenges. She had also developed strong working relationships with several classmates who were willing to provide mutual support during the most difficult portions of training. The cold Pacific Ocean played a central role in many SEAL training exercises, and Sarah discovered that her smaller body size actually provided some advantages in maintaining core body temperature during extended water operations. While larger students sometimes struggled with heat loss during long swimming exercises, her physiology allowed her to maintain effectiveness even during the most demanding aquatic training events. One of the most memorable challenges during Hell Week involved a navigation exercise that required students to work in small teams while carrying heavy equipment across difficult terrain in complete darkness. Sarah's experience as a sniper had given her exceptional skills in land navigation and movement techniques, and she found herself serving as the primary navigator for her team during this critical exercise. When her team became disoriented in heavy fog and rough terrain, Sarah's ability to maintain direction and locate checkpoints using minimal reference points proved crucial to their success. Her calm leadership during this crisis situation earned the respect of teammates who had initially been uncertain about working with a female team member. By the end of the exercise, these same men were actively seeking her input on tactical problems and acknowledging her contributions to team performance. The marksmanship training portions of the SEAL program allowed Sarah to demonstrate the skills that had first brought her to the attention of special operations recruiters. She consistently achieved the highest scores in her class on various shooting exercises, and her ability to teach and mentor other students in advanced marksmanship techniques made her a valuable resource for the entire group. Commander Morrison observed many of these training exercises personally, watching Sarah's progress with the analytical attention he brought to all aspects of the program. What impressed him most was not just her individual performance, but her ability to integrate effectively into the team-based environment that characterized all special operations units. She had successfully overcome the initial skepticism of her classmates and established herself as a valued team member. As graduation from BUD/S training approached, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Montana to the elite ranks of Navy SEALs. Every challenge she had overcome, every doubt she had confronted, and every hour of preparation had contributed to her success in one of the military's most demanding programs. The graduation ceremony was attended by high-ranking military officials, family members, and media representatives who understood the historic significance of the moment. When Sarah received her SEAL Trident insignia, she became the first woman to earn the right to wear the symbol that represented membership in one of the world's most elite military units. Commander Morrison's remarks during the ceremony focused on the exceptional performance and dedication demonstrated by all graduates, but he made special mention of Sarah's achievement in becoming the first woman to complete SEAL training. He emphasized that her success had been earned through the same standards and requirements applied to all SEAL candidates, and that her presence in the program represented an important step forward for gender equality in military special operations. Following graduation, Sarah was assigned to a SEAL team where she would begin the operational phase of her career in special operations. Her new teammates welcomed her with the respect accorded to all SEALs, understanding that her presence meant she had proven herself capable of meeting the highest standards of their profession. Years later, when asked about that moment when Commander Morrison had declared that no one could make the impossible shot, Sarah would smile and reflect on how that single bullet had opened doors not just for herself, but for all the women who would follow in her footsteps. The shot had been perfect, but, more importantly, it had been the first step in proving that excellence knows no gender boundaries when it comes to serving one's country with honor and distinction.